Hello, everyone. Welcome to KTAL News Now. I'm your host, Anthony Mocklin, and March is National Developmental Disabilities Month. And here to talk with me today more about this is Robin Bridges. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Certainly. My husband and we built our family by the means of adoption with the help and support of the Dave Thomas Foundation. And it's almost been 10 years. I can't believe it. Time flies when you're having a really ridiculously good time, huh, Doll? And so, about 10 years ago, my husband and we were paired up with a young man by the name of Dawson Bridges. Well, now Dawson Bridges. And we discovered quickly thereafter that he had an older brother, Dalton. Yes, that's you, Boo. And so, in which case, they told us about his challenges and that kind of thing. And my husband and after some consideration and such, we felt that the boys deserved to be together. I figured the children had lost everything a child could possibly lose. The last thing they needed to lose was each other. So my husband and went down the path of the journey for adoption, and we adopted Dalton and his younger brother Dawson. So Dalton is now chronologically 20. Dalton is chronologically 20 and intellectually about 18 months. No, I know you're far groovier than that, huh? That's right. You tell everybody I am far smarter than that. So, in which case, Dalton, he has some challenges. He has cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and he's nonverbal, and he's legally blind, quadriplegic, so he gets to rock a beautiful wheelchair, and um, he requires lots of assistance and support in his everyday living, and he will for the rest of his life. And that's Dalton. And then his younger brother is junior in high school and on the football team and all the good stuff. So he's living his best life.
And could you dive into a little bit more about what led you to consider adopting a child with a developmental disability?
I originally had posted in regards to Dawson because I had seen Dalton probably a couple of weeks prior. And I remember putting my hand on his little face and going, "Oh, you beautiful little boy. I don't think I'm the right mama for you, but I sure hope you find a good one." And I turned around and I posted for Dawson. They weren't posted together. Normally, children that are in foster care or to be adopted or what have you, they're usually posted together if they're siblings. Um, so I didn't think anything of it because, of course, they don't give the last names and all that stuff. And when the caseworker had called us from the Dave Thomas Foundation, she had said, that she thought that my husband and I would be a great match for Dawson, our younger one. And I said, fantastic. That's great. That's awesome. And she said, well, I thought you might want to know that he's got an older brother. Like he's got an older brother. Well, where is he? Did he knock over a bank or something? And she's like, well, no, but he has issues. And I'm like, ma'am, we all have issues. Where's the brother? Because normally they post the kiddos together if they're a sibling group. And she said, well, he has cerebral palsy, he has epilepsy, he's nonverbal, he's legally blind, he's quadriplegic, he's all the diagnoses, right? That just make him like the happiest dude in town. And I said, but he didn't knock over a bank, right? And she's like, no, I promise you he didn't. My husband's a CPA, so, got to make sure that we don't have any financial crimes. So I said, well, how about this? Could you do me a favor? Could you, email me his information? Let me talk to my husband. Could I call you back tomorrow? And she's like, oh, absolutely. So the whole time while we were going through this process, because to adopt a child out of foster care, it takes time. This is not, a journey for the week by any means. And so anyway, we turned around and I turned around and I got the email and I opened it up and lo and behold, it was the little boy that I had put my hand on his face and said, "Oh, you beautiful little boy. I hope you'll find a good mama." And so I printed out all of his information and I came home and my husband and I were sitting there at dinner and I said, "So we heard from a caseworker today about a child," and he goes, "Oh, great, And I turned around, I gave him a picture of Dawson, cute little kid with glasses and chubby cheeks and the whole business. And he says, Ah, don't tell me Legos and superheroes, because that's usually what you read when you read about a little boy. I go, oh yeah, Legos and superheroes. And I say, but he has an older brother. And he's like, okay, well, where's the brother? Great minds think alike. So I turned around and I handed him a picture of Dalton. And in the picture for Dalton, you could tell that he had challenges, and you could tell that he was in a wheelchair. And my husband's like, so he needs a wheelchair. He uses a wheelchair, huh? And I said, yep, he uses a wheelchair. And so my husband goes, well, I guess we'll have to put in a ramp, huh? Yes, dear, we'd have to put in a ramp. And I said, are you okay with it? Like, just asking, making sure. And he's like, it's just diagnoses. We'll figure it out. So, next day I turn around and I called our case manager here in Florida. And I said, well, I know that our case probably doesn't look like to accommodate for, but can you help us? Because there's a set of boys that, need a mom and a dad. And so they helped us to make sure that we had everything that we needed. And I told her, if there was anything that we needed to do to make sure that we were prepared and able to take care of both of the children, just let us know and all of that. And we started down that path. And that was in 2015. And we managed to go through all the process. And my husband and I, we made 6 trips up to Ohio. That's where the boys were originally. And just because I wanted to make sure that the boys knew who we were. I could only imagine how scared they must have been, to like move from their home and, from a foster family and move to another state. Heck, my son Dawson thought he was moving to another country. So anyway, so we moved him to Florida, and here we are. Almost 10 years later, we moved them down in 2016, and they've been here with us ever since.
Wow, that's really awesome. And in your experience, what has surprised you the most since welcoming them into your family?
At first, my learning curve looked like a telephone pole. Go straight up and keep on running. Don't look back. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Just keep moving. I, I I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. That's the first thing. But I was open to learning. I was open to asking questions. And that's all you could do. And man, did I take notes. Every doctor's office, I came in with this binder, and I had it sectioned off for each type of doctor, because with Dalton, you've got a lot of ologies, cardiology, pulmonology, you name the ology, we got one. And so in which case I had the binder broken up for all the specialists. And when we would start talking about Dalton, I would take notes. And so if they mentioned something I didn't know what it was, I said, well, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that to me? And I wrote it down so that I could go back and look it up and I better understand later. And if they asked me something about one of the other specialties, I could go into my notebook and I could say, well, from our last appointment, this is what we discussed and whatever, and that kind of thing. So if that makes it easier to better take care of Dalton, because he could not afford for me to, be guessing, you know. Um, but I think some of the things that really kind of surprised me, like later, when we first got started, it was definitely the learning curve thing with the boys, and Dawson kind of knowing like boundaries and all of that stuff, because at first, he wanted to test those boundaries, like, well, I don't eat that. Oh, you don't. Let's talk about healthy. Doritos and chicken nuggets are not the only foods in the food group, my son. Let's work with something else, okay? And no, pizza is not the best alternative either. um, but after a while, I'll be honest, Dalton is not nearly as challenging as people would assume. I mean, he really isn't. He's happy and giggly and amazing in all of the right ways. He brings a whole lot of joy into this house. He definitely keeps me young. I ain't gonna lie. Because of course I'm always on the go with him. Like right now, he's 20 years old. he's on a baseball team with kids just like him, and he has a blast. And they have Friday night games, Nights in the Lights, and they have Saturday afternoon games, and he has a blast with that. And it's amazing how, as big of a community as Dalton belongs to now, it's also very small. I get to meet parents that have, children just like Dalton, and have, all kinds of challenges and that kind of thing. And we support each other. And, we find different ways to make things fun. Um, I will tell you that I have been overly pleasantly surprised over the years of the kindness and generosity and love that has been poured upon our family and our son Dalton, and making sure that he has what he needs, and helping us to get him to have the best quality of life we possibly can for him. Um, I know that people turn around and they look at our two boys and they go, that Dalton would probably be our biggest challenge in the whole night. I'll tell you, my 17-year-old, he's got an opinion. And he's a great kid too. Don't get me wrong. He does great in school, good grades, and all that stuff. But if he could find a crazy little elf to clean his room, I'd be all over that. Or help him with his chores every once in a while. But he's typical. He's a typical 17-year-old. So there's nothing wrong with that either. I think that the boys settled in really well. I mean, I'm mom, and my husband's dad, and and we all the life experiences that a mom and a dad would have with their kids, whether we gave birth to them or not. I could not possibly love these kids more if I did give birth to them. They're just good kids. And some of the challenges, at first, like getting a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Okay, so we did some hunting and we did some navigating and we figured it all out. And was it a challenge at first? Yeah, it was a challenge, but it wasn't something we couldn't, get through, you know? And that's kind of like everything that we do with Dalton, there's ways to accommodate for him, like we just make life accommodations, like we go on vacation. Well, Dalton can't fly. Dalton has a shunt in the back of his head, so flying is not an option. So it's either, you know, road trips, train trips, or cruise ships. We live in Florida. Cruise ships win. And he loves it because he loves the wind in his face, and he loves just being outside and that fresh air and everything. And you get plenty of that on a cruise ship, and you get them on the ship. And and cruise lines are really wonderful because they're willing to accommodate for a kiddo like Dalton. We have a hospital bed brought onto the ship for him. How cool is that? you know so it's easy to accommodate for him, and getting him in and out of bed and all that stuff, and making sure that he's safe when he's sleeping. And because he is just like an infant. He's 18, intellectually 18 months, so he wouldn't understand, like, don't roll over onto the floor, my child. So, but learning medications, learning, DME supplies and how to get them, and what he needs, and navigating that stuff. But every time I had a challenge, it always seemed like I was able to find somebody that either went through it before or had a vast load of knowledge on that area, like when Dalton was turning 18. Things that people didn't tell you when your child is turning 18. So I'm going to share it here because I think that anybody that listens to this might benefit from it. Before your child turns 18, you want to make sure you open up an account with them. Yeah, so that when they move and transition into, like, say, Social Security disability, you need to have an account with their name on it to be able to put their Social Security disability check into it. I didn't have that. So we were fortunate, we were blessed because we mentioned it, and somebody helped us to get an attorney, and we applied for guardian advocacy. And my husband and I now have guardian advocacy over Dalton. You didn't know what we didn't know, and so in which case we got everything squared away. And I mean, it was a small blip in the road, but we were happy because other people had experienced it, and they were like, "Oh, they didn't tell you." I'm like, nope. missed that lesson. So we got it fixed and figured out, but it wasn't like it caused us any great pain or anything. And there's lots of attorneys out there that will help with taking care of some of the legal costs with helping to get guardian advocacy for a child like Dalton. And that's kind of what happened with us. We had an attorney that was, here that works in the city, and he, helped us to navigate through it and get guardian advocacy for both Stephen and I, my husband. And actually this year, when Dawson turns 18, he'll help us to get Dawson to be a guardian advocate as well for his brother. Because God forbid something was to happen to Stephen and I never want Dawson to ever have to fight for his brother again. I never wanted him to ever know what it feels like to fight to keep his brother. So we're gonna fix that, so he never has to worry about it.
And I guess for families who might be considering doing the same thing, what do they commonly like misunderstand about raising a child with a developmental disability?
But it's gonna be harder than they thought it was. I promise you, that was the thing that probably was the most intimidating, and is really it's not. It I will tell you, Dalton is very routine, very predictable. Um, Even though he's nonverbal, let me tell you, he gets his point across. When he wants to watch Mickey Mouse, and when he wants to watch Super Y. When he wants to listen to, "Baby Got Back" by Sir Mix-a-Lot. um, some of his favorite tunes or whatever. But he he gets his point across, and it. Like when he's hungry, or when he wants to be changed, or needs to be changed, or whatever the case may be, because he makes it known. You just watch and learn. They'll teach you. But they also have the greatest capacity of love. And I don't think I was ever prepared for how much I love that boy. I I couldn't even express the amount of joy that this little man brings me. I'll always be his mom, and he'll always be with me. He's my buddy. He, I think people turn around, they see it as, um maybe, maybe limiting, or maybe like too much work, or all that stuff. But it's like any other child. I know that when I was first getting Dalton, I had some folks turn around and say, "Well, that's going to be a lot of work." And my answer to them was always, yes, being a parent is a lot of work. And it is. Any parent, it's a lot of work. It's just that my work doesn't end at the age of 18. That's all. But it takes planning and routine. And you keep a schedule, just like any other child. You keep a schedule, and everything works out. Anytime I thought I had a challenge that I was like, okay, can I do this? It always worked out. It always did. It always has. And he's happy, and don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of the diagnosis, because we can certainly work with the diagnosis. I think for families, they're intimidated by, like what the diagnosis is, or that kind of thing. And I was the same way. I mean, I'm not saying like, oh, I walked into this knowing like I was going to do amazing. No, not even close. And then when I first got started, I'm like, okay, all right, I can learn this. And every time I got to a point where I thought, okay, just take a deep breath, focus. Okay, you just take care of what needs to be taken care of right now, and everything else will be fine. And as long as he's okay, I'm okay. And that was the thing. And I mean, we had some major emergency items that came up. We had to rush him to the hospital for emergency brain surgery. You know, Here I am a year into having this child, and all of a sudden, he's like getting sick, and I can't figure out. I've gone down all the things like I could possibly think of that it was, and I couldn't come up with a good answer as to why he was so sick. So off to the emergency room we went, and lo and behold, we found out the shunt in his head was malfunctioning. Yep. And we went in that night for emergency brain surgery. That was intense, you know. But we got through it, and he's happy and healthy, and and anything that comes your way, you can handle. You really can. You know, there's nothing that's gonna get to be too big. You know, at least that hasn't for me. And I hope that that's the experience that other people have as well. Um, I've gotten to meet a lot of moms and dads and caregivers that have kiddos like Dalton, and some kids that are even worse off than Dalton in regards to diagnoses and stuff. And they've shared with me because I always look at how Dalton is, and I'm like, do you find it to be a challenge? And I ask them, and they're like, nope, it's just one day at a time. You take the challenge as it comes, and you just move through it. And we don't worry about that. You know, yeah. I mean, there are things that you just accommodate your life for, and he was definitely worth my accommodation, if you will. You know.
And I know you've talked about the your experiences with him and bringing him into your family. I guess if you had to, it's probably really hard to narrow this down, but what has been like the greatest joy since welcoming him into your life and stepping in and being his mother?
Wow. There have been some landmark items that have happened for Dalton. Um, the first time he called for me and started saying "mum, mum, 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 mum," um, he's nonverbal, but he knew I was mum. Or the first time that he called my husband dad, 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 right? That you want to see a big man, a big man turn into a big pile of a puddle. That happened to my husband. Um, I will say we discovered that because Dalton is considered legally blind, he has negative 13 in both eyes. But we took him to the ophthalmologist, and they said that we could get him glasses, and it would help him to see. And when we got him his glasses, he's not a big fan of wearing them, I'll be honest. But we're still working on getting him used to wearing them. But I remember the first time he actually was able to see my face. I remember putting his glasses on, and I started talking to him, and I was right there in front of him with his glasses on. And I remember him just kept on putting his hands on my face as I was talking, and he started giggling. I don't know if he giggled because he thought I was funny looking or giggled because he could actually see me. I don't know. All I know is he was happy, and I just started crying because I realized at that moment in time that my son could see me. Um, Proud moment, he graduated from high school. Didn't think that that was a possibility for him, but he did. He got to graduate from high school. Um, he You know, I think of all the times that he's accomplished something that nobody thought he would. When we got Dalton, he was 10 years old and 44 pounds. And now he's 20 years old and he's 121 pounds, and he's healthy. And he's just he surprises me with things that he does. And I'm like, oh, I know he got that. I know he understood that. You know, when he turns around and we're going somewhere and that kind of thing, and he'll start repeating either Mickey Mouse or one of his toys, and he'll yell out, "Let's go," because he wants us to move it along. He's like, "Mom, you're taking too long. Let's go." I'm like, "Well, okay." And he used it in the proper context of what we were doing. Um, so I know that he's learning and he's discovering, and that's a good thing. And No, he won't be a Rhodes Scholar, but I'll tell you, he's as happy as ever.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share everything. I mean, that is such a wonderful, wonderful story. And, I have a lot of respect for you and just the courage to take that leap, like you said, and just make somebody happy. That's just really, really awesome to hear that, all that. So thank you for that.
Well, it is a leap of faith because the whole time we were going through the process of adoption, I kept on. The only thing I prayed for was, please send me the child or children that I could have the most positive lifelong impact on. I didn't say I wanted boys, didn't say I wanted girls, didn't say nationality or anything to that nature. Just send me the child or children I could have the most positive lifelong impact on. So I know when he sent them to me, there's no mistake. Those are my sons. And I knew it. And I'm happy to have them, both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speechless personally. Like, just hearing all that and, it's making me, emotional and everything. So I appreciate you for sharing all that, truly.
Completely my pleasure. And I hope that other parents, find their way through the process of adoption. It's not easy. Be patient, be persistent. Those are my two words of wisdom there. But if a child is presented to you and you have the capacity to show love and provide stability, everything else works itself out. It does. All the resources, the everything else works itself out. All you need to do is have the capacity to care and have an open heart. And these kiddos need moms and dads just like everybody else. I turn around and I tell people all the time, that there are kids that fall into the ordinary, and then there's my Dalton who falls under the extraordinary. And a lot of people aren't willing to take on the extraordinary. So if you're willing to take on the extraordinary, there's a kid out there that needs a mom and a dad, or a mom or a dad, or a caregiver. Two moms, two dads, whatever. They just need somebody to care.